In large setting, all else aside, the game is usually nice to look at. Call of Duty World War II certainly has some interesting timing. It has the dubious duty of returning the landmark first-person series to its titular roots at a time when any game centered on fascism, nationalism, and especially Nazism is under extra scrutiny. And it just so happened to release a week after another game dealt with that same subject matter head-on. The change in setting follows the powerfully negative reaction to last year's spacey Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, with World War II representing a hard return to the series' slightly less bombastic roots. There are no spaceships, powered exoskeletons, robots, or drones in World War II. There's no wall running or double jumping. There are just guns and the people who hold and shoot them. That ends up being just the start of the game's problems, though. As much as World War II peels away at the bloat surrounding the long-running series, it doesn't really replace it. Its campaign starts with the US invasion of Normandy and hits every other European theater cliché from there. It strikes those clichés so sharply on the nose that their own mother would NT recognize them, even with the aid of the same Band of Brothers DVD box set the developers seem to use for reference. Déjà vu is a French phrase. Your primary playable character is Texas farm boy Red Daniels, who just wants to be a hero and clings to a photo of his girl back home. His commanding officer is a shady jerk who made a mysterious, questionable decision with his last platoon. At some point your squad finds civilians but can't decide what to do with them. You snipe some people from a church bell tower. If none of this is familiar, may I suggest one of the millions of pieces of media about World War II. The gameplay doesn't fare any better than the story. Its major mechanical shake-ups, in the single-player campaign at least, amount to a smattering of stealth sequences and health that no longer regenerates. The latter change seems massive at first, but, besides only hit-kill shots from rockets and snipers, I rarely felt I was in any extra danger. You can receive first aid kits from around the battlefield and further request them from a squad mate. In fact, every named character around Red basically acts as a special skill that you charge up by shooting Nazis or performing heroic actions. This is the closest World War II comes to an interesting replacement for the wrinkles of previous Call of Duty campaigns. At times, different squad mates will take one of two different positions around an enemy encampment. Without even realizing it, I would follow one soldier's route to the other, which would effectively lock me into a certain supply line. If I dug in with Private Zeusman, for instance, it received those recurring health packs but not free ammunition. Others might offer binoculars that highlight enemies. I can't remember any other character's name. Theoretically, putting characters' names and faces to these skills might make them more memorable. Maybe you like one ability better than another, so you wind up spending more time with your corresponding brother in arms, or maybe you like Zeusman better than short writing pause to look up a forgettable character's name ILO and learn to play differently depending on what you have available. Poor timing. The problem is that the characters are such rough fabrications with so little development that it's impossible to care about them for any reason. 1 minute your hard-ass sergeant is ready to extrajudicially execute you. In the next scene, he's just a misunderstood war hero who cared too much. The game never commits to anyone being anything specific or interesting for long enough to make it matter. World War II only rarely addresses the atrocities behind the war itself. Set-piece battles are just as over-the-top as ever, just set in a different era. Stealth missions break up some of the basic shooting, but they're simple and infrequent. You play most of the game as Red Daniels, Texas farm boy, but sometimes swap to other perspectives. Most major battles amount to sitting still and shooting hordes of enemies until they retreat. The game wants you to care about its characters, without ever giving you much reason to. Enemies in the campaign are surprisingly bullet-spongy and it can interrupt your rhythm. Zombies mode is less vibrant this year, but sports several useful improvements. Divisions severely limit how you can build your competitive character. While it's mechanically simplified, the multiplayer is chock full of things to collect and level up. In fact, World War II is so committed to being non-committal it borders on offensive. In one early scene, Red chastises a fellow soldier for mocking dead Nazis. He barks, "Hey, that's somebody's son," before a friend starts listing off German celebrities and achievements that prove they're not all bad. While I get what the scene was likely going for, it's badly missing a third party to point out the difference between murderous white supremacists and the arc of German history. Combined with how the game glosses over or outright ignores the ideology and crimes of the war while also painting it as just another hurrah victory in US military history, the storytelling here makes me more than a little queasy. You could argue that Call of Duty campaigns have always been politically tone-deaf, and you'd be right. But other games in the franchise have at least tried to be evocative mechanically and narratively, successfully or not. Black Ops ended with the protagonist assassinating JFK, for God's sake. World War II just feels capitulatory in the ugliest way, by comparison, and it's just dead boring after we've had 11 years to think of new stories to tell in the war itself. Page 2. A similar issue plagues the multiplayer, which will probably account for the vast majority of playtime for most players. The combat here is conservative to the point of dullness. There are none of the fancy movement options that you'd find in Titanfall 2 or even in the last several Call of Duty games. There are no especially wacky powers or grenades, like you'd find in Destiny or Halo. It even strips out the campaign's very nominal cover system and reintroduces regenerating health. WWII's multiplayer is, as it was in earlier Call of Duty games, all about microsecond reflexes and small upgrades over time. It's about knowing general player behavior and any given map so well that you know someone's coming around a corner a quarter second before they know you're waiting for them. It's bare bones and twitchy in a way that's just not interesting. In the single-player campaign, by contrast, the AI enemies are actually two hearty bullet sponges that can't be dispatched in a satisfying rhythm. But multiplayer leaves every competitor feeling paper-thin, and it left me dying before I even knew I was being shot. That's partly down to me not knowing what I was doing, to be fair, but I've grown accustomed to having ways to get in and out of trouble in other shooters despite any lack of experience. Sometimes that's wall running at speed. Sometimes it's hopping into a giant robot to hold down a control point. In the case of Destiny and Halo, it's just having enough health to play spatial mind games with my opponent. This game has none of that. You kill, you die, you hit the square button as quickly as possible so you don't have to watch an instant replay of whoever shot you. That almost certainly appeals to some purists out there, likely the very people publisher Activision wants to win back with this time-traveling reset for the series. But even then, I'm not sure the kind of player will love every change. Tightened up for tightening's sake, this year's spin on the Create a Class system is divisions, which basically amounts to certain perks being bundled together. The infantryman class can sprint faster, use bayonets, and strap more attachments to primary weapons, for example. Meanwhile, an expeditionary gets incendiary shotgun rounds and extra ammo. You can still mix and match attachments from one weapon to another, of course. And you'll earn plenty of them as you level up both your character and the weapons themselves in typical Call of Duty multiplayer fashion. What you can't do is select perks from multiple divisions. They're locked together in a way that feels oddly restrictive for the series, especially since certain class-specific perks only affect certain weapons. The multiplayer loadouts aren't just rigid, you can straight up miss out on certain perks if you want to play one division with a gun that doesn't fit their suggested style. Incendiary shotgun rounds are no good used to a rifle, after all. You can cut loose just a bit more in Zombies mode, because why should NT while the mode is much more serious and I think duller for it than last year's over-the-top funhouse romp. It's fundamentally almost identical to the mode that debuted in Call of Duty World at War. Monsters come in waves. You shoot them, they get stronger, you buy better weapons with accruing currency or buy your way into new areas. The one thing that seems to have been stripped down is that you can no longer board up windows for points. That does sharpen the focus on combat a bit. In that same spirit, objectives are more clearly marked than ever. So WWII's cooperative segment is less obtuse than ever and more focused on, well, efficient cooperation. I called it an overall improvement compared to past years, even if the straight-laced horror aesthetic is not. Nothing about the small improvements will change anyone's mind about Zombies mode, though, just like the rest of World War II won't change anyone's mind about Call of Duty in general. This game sports the series' weakest campaign in years, a far cry from Black Ops 2's compelling branching narrative or even Infinite Warfare's smattering of side quests. Meanwhile, the multiplayer suite delaminates the series' once large list of features. If anything, this is a soft reboot of the series. It's meant to appeal to the fans who love the ideas laid out by Call of Duty 4, who slowly lost touch as the series incrementally drifted into new ideas. Maybe next year's game will include its own new set of rules and improvements. Maybe they'll take the series in a completely different direction than it was headed down before. But for now, we have the much simplified, often boring, oddly restrictive Call of Duty World War II. The good stealth sequences aren't all that bad. Squad member skills are almost a good idea. Zombies mode isn't as needlessly complicated as in previous years. The bads are full of World War II cliches. I thought it was setting up some kind of twisted wasn't. Characters feel fabricated and totally unmemorable. Divisions restrict your create class choices. Stripped-down multiplayer doesn't give many tactical options besides get better. The uglier the game comes this close to asking you to empathize with the literal Third Reich. Verdict: this is a step backward for the series, and not just chronologically. Skip it.